The night the fire finally loosened its grip on the valley, the ground was still warm enough to breathe back at the cold, and the air smelled like rain that had arrived too late. It was October 17, 2018, just after dawn, in the eastern edge of the Santa Lucia Range in central California. The smoke had thinned into a pale veil, lifting slowly between blackened trunks and shattered rock. Ash lay everywhere, soft as snow, muffling sound. Nothing moved. Not the birds. Not the wind. Even the creek below the ridge ran quietly, as if unsure whether it was allowed to keep going. In a shallow ravine carved by winter runoff, a shape shifted where no life was expected to remain. A gray wolf stood motionless among the scorched manzanita, her coat dusted white, her ribs faintly visible beneath the soot. She had not fed in days. The fire had driven the deer east, scattered the elk, burned the small things that once darted through the undergrowth. Her eyes tracked the ravine, not with hunger, but with a guarded alertness that suggested she was waiting for something she did not fully understand. Then, from beneath a fallen slab of sandstone, a sound broke the stillness. It was thin, uncertain. A breath that did not yet know how to ask for help. The wolf did not advance at first. She lowered her head slightly, ears angling forward, reading the air. The scent that reached her was wrong. Too warm. Too foreign. It carried the faint, unmistakable trace of a big cat, sharp, dry, unfamiliar to this range. And beneath it, something else. Milk, fear, and the fragile heat of new life. She took one step. The ground crunched softly under her weight. Ash lifted and settled again. The sound from beneath the stone faltered, then returned, weaker. She took another step. When she reached the slab, the wolf paused. The stone had cracked during the fire, leaving a narrow gap just wide enough for smoke to escape. Inside, shadow clung stubbornly to the earth. She lowered herself, careful, deliberate, and pressed her nose toward the opening. The scent was unmistakable now. A lion cub lay trapped beneath the rock, its body wedged awkwardly, its tawny fur matted with ash and dried blood. One hind leg was pinned. The cub's eyes were open but unfocused, its breath shallow, uneven. The mother was gone, her scent cold, broken, ending abruptly several yards upslope where the fire had turned fiercest. The wolf did not bare her teeth. She did not lunge. She did not retreat. She waited. For a long moment nothing happened. The cub's breathing slowed. The ravine seemed to hold its breath with them. Somewhere far off, a single ember collapsed into dust. Then the wolf began to dig. She worked with precision, pulling ash and loose stone away from the gap, careful not to send debris down onto the cub's head. Her movements were quiet, almost methodical, as if guided by an instinct older than hunger. When the slab shifted slightly, she stopped, reassessed, and changed her angle. Minutes passed. Maybe more. Time felt suspended, distorted by smoke and silence. At last, the slab gave enough to free the cub's leg. The cub cried out, a sharp, startled sound that echoed once against the ravine wall before disappearing into the trees. The wolf froze, body taut, eyes scanning the ridge above. Nothing answered. Slowly, she reached in and caught the cub by the scruff of the neck. She lifted gently, adjusting her grip twice to avoid the injured leg. The cub's body dangled, limp with exhaustion, its tail twitching weakly. When the wolf set it down on the ash-covered ground, the cub did not try to flee. It did not know how. The wolf stepped back. She watched. The cub struggled to sit, failed, and collapsed onto its side. Its chest fluttered, breath uneven. The smell of blood thickened the air. This should have been the end of the encounter. Everything in the wild is shaped by ends. But the wolf did not leave. She circled once, then lay down a few feet away, placing herself between the cub and the open slope. Her ears stayed alert, rotating independently, cataloging every distant sound. When the cub tried to move and cried again, the wolf rose, crossed the short distance, and nudged the cub's flank with her nose. The cub stilled. Its breathing eased slightly. The wolf lay down again, closer this time. As the sun lifted higher, warmth returned slowly to the ravine. The cub slept in fits, waking to small, confused movements, each one answered by the wolf shifting position, blocking the wind, offering heat. When thirst finally drove the cub to lift its head and open its mouth, the wolf stood, disappeared briefly into the trees, and returned with her muzzle wet. She lowered it to the cub's face. The cub licked instinctively. This was not adoption. Not yet. It was something quieter, less defined. A pause in the expected order of things. By midday, the smoke had thinned enough for light to break through the canopy in long, pale beams. From the ridge above, the land looked empty. Burnt. Finished. But in the ravine, two animals lay pressed against the same patch of surviving earth, breathing in uneven rhythm. As evening approached, the wolf rose again. She looked downslope toward the creek, then back at the cub. She paced once, stopped, and returned to the cub's side. Carefully, she took the scruff of its neck in her jaws. The cub protested weakly, then went still. The wolf lifted, adjusted, and began to climb. Each step was measured. She avoided loose rock. When the cub's injured leg brushed against her chest, she shifted her grip without stopping. The climb took time. When she reached the tree line, her sides were heaving, her breath visible in the cooling air. She did not stop there. She kept moving. By the time darkness settled over the range, the wolf had carried the cub more than a mile from the ravine, away from the burned core of the fire, toward a narrow band of forest the flames had skipped. There, beneath a cedar whose roots held the soil together, she set the cub down. She lay beside it. And through the long night that followed, as the land cooled and the smoke finally lifted from the stars, the wolf remained awake, watching, listening, guarding a life that should never have been hers to keep. Morning returned without ceremony. The light slid in low and pale beneath the cedar branches, touching the wolf's flank first, then the cub's face. The cub stirred, confused by the unfamiliar warmth that was not the sun. Its breath caught once, twice, then steadied when it felt the steady presence beside it. The wolf did not move. She had learned, sometime in the night, that stillness was a kind of language. The cub tried to rise. Its front paws pushed into the soil, claws catching on roots and needles, but the injured leg betrayed it. The body tipped, awkward and heavy, and the cub fell again with a dull sound that echoed softly under the tree. The wolf's head lifted instantly. Her ears angled forward, eyes narrowing, not with threat, but with attention. She stood and stepped closer, blocking the cub from the open slope beyond the roots. The cub did not cry this time. It lay still, sides fluttering, eyes tracking the wolf's movements with something like trust, though it had no name for the feeling. Its world had collapsed into heat and pain and unfamiliar scents. The wolf's smell, wild, sharp, steady, had become the only constant. The wolf lowered her head and nudged the cub's shoulder, just enough to roll it slightly away from the injured leg. The cub's breathing eased. The wolf stepped back, lay down again, and rested her chin on her forepaws, close enough that her breath stirred the cub's whiskers. Hours passed this way. The forest around them was quiet but not dead. Somewhere deeper among the trees, a jay called once and fell silent. Insects tested the air, tentative after the fire. The creek below murmured steadily, unchanged by loss. The wolf's body remained angled outward, always toward the unseen edges of danger, while her eyes returned again and again to the cub. When hunger finally asserted itself, it came gently, like a reminder rather than a demand. The wolf rose, stretched slowly, and stepped away. She did not go far. Just beyond the cedar's shadow, she stopped, looked back, and waited. The cub lifted its head and watched her. It did not follow. It could not. But it did not panic either. Something had settled between them overnight, an unspoken understanding that distance did not always mean disappearance. The wolf moved off, silent among the trees. She returned less than an hour later, muzzle stained dark. She did not bring meat. Instead, she lay down beside the cub again, her body warm from movement. When the cub nosed clumsily at her chest, guided by instinct older than memory, the wolf tensed for a brief, fragile moment. Then she stayed still. The cub's attempts were awkward, confused, driven by hunger but thwarted by difference. Nothing came of it. After a few moments, the cub sagged, exhausted, and rested its head against the wolf's side. The wolf exhaled slowly, a long breath that carried no frustration, only acceptance. This was not what she had expected of the day. As the sun climbed, patterns began to form. The wolf learned the cub's limits, how far it could crawl before pain stopped it, how its breathing changed before exhaustion set in. The cub learned the wolf's rhythms, the way her ears flicked at distant sounds, the subtle shift in her weight before she stood, the reassurance of her return. By afternoon, something strange emerged. The cub began to vocalize softly whenever the wolf moved out of sight, not in panic but in inquiry. Short, questioning sounds, tentative and restrained. Each time, the wolf returned sooner, as if answering. She did not hurry. She did not soothe. She simply reappeared. The forest bore witness quietly. As the light softened, the wolf led the cub a few yards at a time, never forcing, never pulling. When the cub tired, she stopped. When it struggled, she waited. They covered little ground, but the movement itself seemed to matter, to both of them. Near dusk, the wolf rose and disappeared again, this time for longer. The cub watched the place where she had vanished until the light dimmed and shadows lengthened. Its breathing quickened just slightly. Then the wolf returned. She carried something small in her jaws, unidentifiable, wrapped in fur and bone. She laid it down several feet away, tore it open, and stepped back. The cub did not approach. It watched, uncertain. The wolf waited, unmoving, until the cub dragged itself forward inch by inch, curiosity overcoming hesitation. When the cub reached the offering, it sniffed, recoiled once, then returned. Its first attempts were clumsy, teeth unfamiliar with the work. The wolf did not intervene. She watched as the cub learned, slowly, painfully, what survival required. As darkness crept in again, the cub fell asleep mid-effort, chin resting against the remains, breath steady at last. The wolf lay down beside it, closer than before, her body curved protectively around the small, fragile shape. Above them, the stars returned one by one, sharp and distant. And somewhere deep within the forest, beyond instinct and necessity, a question had begun to form, quiet, unresolved, and impossible to answer yet. Why had she stayed? The third morning came with frost. It clung to the shaded ground beneath the cedar, thin and brittle, turning ash into pale crystals that cracked softly beneath the wolf's paws when she shifted. The cub felt the cold before it understood it. Its body curled tighter against the wolf's flank, seeking the steady heat that had become its anchor. The wolf adjusted without waking fully, drawing one hind leg closer, closing the space between them. By now their days had found a rhythm. It was not the rhythm of a pack, nor of a mother and her young, but something improvised and fragile. The wolf hunted at first light and again near dusk, never straying far, never staying gone too long. Between those absences she watched. The cub slept, woke, struggled, learned. Each movement carried consequence. Each breath felt earned. The injury had begun to change. The swelling along the cub's hind leg had receded slightly, leaving behind stiffness and an awkward drag that forced it to adapt. It learned to shift its weight, to lean more heavily on its front paws, to move in short, deliberate bursts. The wolf noticed everything. When the cub faltered, she did not rush to correct it. She simply positioned herself nearby, close enough to intervene if the struggle tipped toward danger. Mid-morning brought a disturbance. A scent drifted through the trees, faint but unmistakable. Human. Old, lingering, carried upslope by warming air. The wolf froze mid-step, ears snapping forward, body lowering instinctively. Her gaze fixed on the forest edge beyond the creek. The cub sensed the change before it understood the cause. Its body stilled, muscles tensing, breath quickening. The wolf moved at once, crossing the small clearing and placing herself directly between the cub and the unseen source. She stood there, unmoving, until the scent faded back into nothing. Only then did she relax. The cub watched her with new attention after that. Something had shifted. The cub began to track the wolf's movements more deliberately, lifting its head whenever she changed position, adjusting its body when she lay down. When she left, even briefly, it oriented itself toward the direction of her departure, as if memorizing the path she had taken. By afternoon, the cub attempted something it had not tried before. While the wolf rested nearby, eyes half closed but alert, the cub pushed itself upright and held the position longer than ever before. Its injured leg trembled under the strain. The ground seemed to tilt. The wolf's head lifted, ears flicking forward. The cub took one step, then another. On the third, it collapsed, chest hitting the earth hard enough to knock the breath from its lungs. The sound was sharp, startling. The wolf was on her feet instantly, nose hovering inches from the cub's face, reading its breath, its scent, the shape of its pain. The cub recovered, slowly, shakily. It did not retreat. Instead, after a long pause, it tried again. This time, the wolf stepped back, creating space, forcing the effort to belong to the cub alone. The cub managed 2 steps before stopping, sides heaving, eyes bright with something that looked dangerously like determination. The wolf lay down again as if to say, that was enough. As daylight softened into late afternoon, a subtle change emerged, one that did not announce itself but lingered at the edges of awareness. The cub began to mimic the wolf. When the wolf drank from the creek, lowering her head cautiously, scanning the surroundings before committing, the cub attempted the same motion from a shallow pool nearby. When the wolf paused to listen, body angled into the wind, the cub stilled too, lifting its head as if trying to catch sounds it did not yet know how to hear. This imitation was imperfect, sometimes clumsy, sometimes dangerous. Once, near dusk, the cub ventured too far from the cedar, drawn by a flicker of movement among the rocks. The wolf reacted instantly, intercepting the cub with a sharp nudge that sent it tumbling sideways. The cub startled, breath rushing out of it, confusion flashing across its face. The wolf did not linger. She turned away and resumed her watch as if the correction had been purely functional. No anger, no reassurance. The cub lay still for a long moment, absorbing the message. When it rose again, it stayed closer. That night, something happened that unsettled them both. As darkness settled, a distant call rolled through the forest, low, resonant, unmistakable. Another wolf, somewhere beyond the ridge, announcing presence, searching. The sound carried history, memory, belonging. The wolf beside the cub froze. Her ears lifted slowly. Her body tensed, muscles coiling beneath her coat. For a moment she did nothing. Then she rose, stepping away from the cub, head lifted, throat tight with response she did not release. The cub watched her. It sensed the pull of something powerful, something that predated their strange, fragile arrangement. It rose unsteadily and followed, stopping just behind her, close enough to feel the vibration of her breath. The call sounded again, closer this time. The wolf did not answer. She stood there, caught between two truths, while the forest held its breath. And in that stillness, the quiet mystery deepened, because whatever bond had formed between them, it was now strong enough to be tested. By the fourth day, the forest began to change them. Not in visible ways at first. Not in anything that could be measured. It was subtler than that, an adjustment in posture, a shift in attention, the quiet recalibration that happens when survival stops being solitary. The wolf moved differently now. Her patrols tightened, circling closer, as if the land itself had shrunk around the small life she guarded. She marked less territory, traveled shorter distances. Each absence was deliberate, efficient, restrained. Hunger pressed at her more insistently, but she did not respond to it with urgency. Something else had taken priority. The cub's strength returned unevenly. Some hours it surprised itself, rising quickly, dragging its injured leg with determination, covering ground in brief, confident bursts. Other times, it seemed smaller than before, exhausted by effort that should not have cost so much. The wolf learned to read these fluctuations without touching. She watched the way the cub held its head, the pace of its breath, the angle of its shoulders before deciding whether to stay close or give space. Late that afternoon, the wind shifted. It came down from the ridge, carrying the sharp, electric scent of another predator. Not wolf. Not bear. Something leaner. More solitary. The wolf sensed it instantly, body lowering, ears flattening slightly as she scanned the tree line. The cub felt the change too. It froze where it stood, halfway between the cedar and the creek, uncertain which direction safety lay. The wolf moved at once, closing the distance in seconds, placing her body directly between the cub and the forest beyond. Her stance changed, weight forward, muscles taut, tail low but steady. The scent drew nearer. The wolf held her ground. From the shadows, a shape appeared. Another mountain lion, lean and cautious, eyes reflecting light as it assessed the scene. It stopped short, puzzled. The cub's scent was unmistakable. The wolf's presence was not. The moment stretched thin. The wolf did not bare her teeth. She did not charge. She simply stood, unmoving, gaze locked, claiming space with nothing but certainty. The other predator hesitated, recalculated, and slowly withdrew back into the trees, its interest dissolved by confusion and resistance. Only when the forest stilled again did the wolf relax. The cub had not moved. It stood exactly where it had frozen, heart racing, eyes fixed on the place where danger had been. The wolf turned back to it and stepped closer, lowering her head until their eyes met briefly. Then she turned away as if the moment required no further explanation. Something in the cub changed after that. It no longer wandered without checking the wolf's position. It no longer tested distance blindly. It began to move with awareness, aligning its actions with hers. When she paused, it paused. When she listened, it listened. When she lay down, it followed, sometimes collapsing against her side with exhaustion, sometimes curling at her feet, learning proximity through repetition. As night fell, the distant wolf calls returned. This time closer. Multiple voices. The sound of a pack moving together through the dark. The wolf lifted her head slowly. Her body responded before her mind could intervene, ears high, breath shallow, muscles tightening with memory. This was not danger. This was home. The language of her life before the fire, before the ravine, before the cub. She stood. The cub rose too, slower, awkward but determined. It followed her a few steps, then stopped, watching as she moved toward the sound. The calls came again, clearer now, threading through the trees like a pull on the chest. The wolf stopped. She turned back. The cub stood alone beneath the cedar, framed by shadow and frost, its injured leg trembling beneath its weight. Its eyes tracked the wolf with quiet intensity, not pleading, not panicked, just present. The wolf hesitated. Time stretched thin again, fragile as ash. Then, slowly, deliberately, she turned away from the calls and returned to the cub. She lay down beside it, placing her body between the cub and the direction the voices came from. The calls continued for a while, then faded into the distance. That night, the cub slept deeply for the first time since the fire. The wolf did not. She lay awake, listening to the forest settle, to the quiet space where a pack should have been, to the small, uneven breathing of a life that had already changed her in ways she did not yet understand. The truth was beginning to surface, heavy and undeniable. This was no longer a pause in instinct. It was a choice. The fifth day arrived without light. Clouds rolled in from the coast sometime before dawn, thick and low, pressing the sky down until the forest felt smaller, enclosed. The air carried the promise of rain, sharp and metallic. When the wolf rose, her joints ached in a way they hadn't before, not from age but from hunger deferred too long. She stood still for a moment, listening. The cub slept curled against her side, its breathing deeper now, steadier. The injured leg twitched occasionally in dreams, a reflex of healing nerves. The wolf watched the rise and fall of the cub's chest, measuring time by breath. She needed to hunt. This time she would have to go farther. The wolf moved away slowly, deliberately loud enough that the cub stirred. The cub lifted its head, blinking, searching. When it saw her, it did not rise. It watched. The wolf paused at the edge of the cedar's shadow and looked back once. Then she disappeared into the trees. The forest swallowed her quickly. Minutes passed. Then more. The cub waited, at first calmly, then with growing tension. The air changed as the clouds thickened, dimming what little light filtered through the canopy. The cub shifted, dragged itself closer to the cedar's roots, pressing into the earth as if trying to anchor itself. A sound broke the stillness. Not the wolf. Branches snapped downslope. Heavy. Uncareful. The cub froze. The scent arrived a moment later. Bear. Close. Curious. Not hunting but not harmless. The cub's body stiffened, breath shallow, every instinct urging it to hide, to disappear into a world that no longer offered concealment. The bear emerged slowly from the undergrowth, massive shoulders rolling beneath dark fur, nose low, sampling the air. It stopped when it saw the cub. The cub did not run. It could not. The bear took one step closer. Then another. The forest seemed to tilt toward the moment, every sound falling away. And then, movement. The wolf burst from the trees behind the bear, not silent now, not cautious. She charged with everything she had left, body low, teeth bared, voice ripping through the air in a raw, explosive snarl that carried warning and intent. The bear whirled, startled, rearing slightly, more surprised than threatened. The wolf did not hesitate. She closed the distance, snapping at the bear's flank, driving it sideways, forcing it to turn, to reassess. She was smaller, lighter, weaker. But she did not yield ground. The bear hesitated just long enough. The wolf struck again, then again, relentless, placing herself squarely between the cub and the danger, every movement declaring ownership she had never intended to claim. At last, the bear backed away, shaking its head once as if dismissing the encounter, and lumbered back into the trees. Silence returned abruptly. The wolf stood trembling, chest heaving, breath ragged. Blood darkened the fur along her shoulder where the bear's claws had grazed her. She did not look at the wound. She went straight to the cub. The cub had not moved. Its eyes were wide, fixed on the wolf, body vibrating with the aftermath of fear it had no way to process. The wolf lowered herself beside it and pressed her body against its smaller frame, anchoring it, absorbing the tremor until it eased. Rain began to fall then, light at first, tentative, then steadier. The wolf stayed still, letting the water wash over both of them, cooling her burning muscles, darkening the ash around them into damp earth. The cub tucked its head beneath her chest, seeking shelter, warmth, something solid. The wolf's breath slowed gradually. This had been the cost. Not just hunger. Not just distance from her kind. Pain. A line crossed that could not be erased. By nightfall, the rain had turned cold. The wolf's injury stiffened, each movement deliberate now. The cub sensed it. It stayed close, closer than before, pressing its weight against the wolf's side in an instinctive mirror of what she had done for it. They slept little. And in the dark, as the forest shifted around them, something irreversible settled into place. An understanding formed not by instinct, but by action. The wolf had chosen. And choice, once made, carries its own gravity. The rain ended just before dawn. What remained was a world rinsed raw, leaves heavy with water, soil dark and yielding, the air sharp with the scent of earth returning to itself. Mist hovered low among the trees, blurring edges, softening distance. The wolf rose slowly, testing her injured shoulder. Pain answered immediately, bright and precise, then dulled into something she could carry. The cub woke when she moved. It lifted its head and found her already watching, her posture altered now. Subtly guarded, weight shifted away from the wounded side. The cub studied her in the same quiet way she had studied it days earlier. Something passed between them then, unspoken and unmistakable. Awareness. They did not linger. The wolf moved first, guiding the cub downslope in short stages. The cub followed, awkward but persistent, its injured leg no longer a liability so much as a reminder. They reached the creek by mid-morning, the water running fuller now from the rain. The wolf drank carefully. The cub mimicked her, lowering its muzzle too fast, startled by the cold, then trying again. Tracks lined the damp banks, deer, fox, raccoon. Signs of life returning. Of competition. The wolf read them all. By midday something new entered the air. A different human scent this time. Fresher. Closer. The wolf stopped at once, body lowering, ears angling forward. The cub froze beside her, instinct now shaping its reactions. The sound came moments later. Voices carried faintly on the breeze, restrained but unmistakable. The forest was no longer theirs alone. The wolf did not panic. She turned away from the creek and led the cub into thicker cover, moving with purpose despite the pain. They traveled slowly, carefully, until the sounds faded again. Only then did the wolf stop. She looked at the cub for a long time. The cub stood steady now, chest rising and falling with quiet resolve. Its eyes were clearer, sharper. It had learned too much too quickly. Learned what it meant to stay, to wait, to watch. The wolf turned away and began to move again, but this time not toward shelter. She led the cub upslope, toward higher ground where the trees thinned and the land opened, toward the edge of territory that was not hers to guard. The climb was slow. The cub struggled but did not stop. When it faltered, the wolf waited. When she slowed, the cub closed the distance. At the ridge they stopped. Below them, the land stretched wide and changed, burned scars giving way to green patches, movement visible even from this distance. This was mountain lion country. The cub's country. Not safe, but familiar in a way the cedar grove never would be. The wolf stood still, breathing shallowly. She did not look back at the forest behind them. She did not look toward where her pack had gone. She looked only at the cub. The cub sensed the shift before it understood it. It stepped closer, brushing against her chest, then stopped when she did not respond in kind. It waited. The wolf lowered her head and nudged the cub gently, forward. The cub hesitated, then took a step. Another. It looked back once. The wolf had not moved. She stood where she was, framed against the thinning mist, her body bearing the marks of the days they had shared. She did not follow. She did not retreat. She simply remained. The cub stood there for a long moment, caught between what had been given and what lay ahead. Then, slowly, it turned and moved downslope, disappearing among the rocks and brush, its gait uneven but determined. The wolf watched until the last trace of movement vanished. She stayed longer still. When she finally turned away, she did not return to the cedar. She moved in the opposite direction, toward higher ground, toward silence. Her path was deliberate, solitary once more. By evening, the ridge held no sign of either of them. Only tracks in damp earth, already softening at the edges. And somewhere beyond the burned scars, two lives carried the weight of a bond that would never be explained, only remembered in the way animals remember things that once meant survival and then meant something more.